Ever wondered if the king of rock and roll had some musical missteps? Did Elvis Presley's legendary catalog include tracks that simply tried too hard? Elvis Presley remains one of the most iconic figures in American music history. His distinctive voice, mean-ogre performances, and boundary-pushing style transformed popular music forever. But even legends have their off days, and sometimes the very production teams tasked with making Elvis sound his best ended up burying his natural talents under layers of unnecessary studio tricks and overwrought arrangements. During Elvis's career, which spanned from the raw, energetic Sun record days of the 1950s to his final recordings in the 1970s, his sound evolved dramatically, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. While many of these changes reflected the musical trends of their eras, certain tracks stand out as examples where studio excess overshadowed Elvis's raw talent and emotional delivery. The following tracks represent instances where overzealous production choices, whether made by RCA executives, Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, or even Elvis himself, resulted in recordings that many fans and critics believe failed to capture the authentic Elvis magic. From syrupy string arrangements to excessive backing vocals and dated studio effects, these songs showcase what happens when production decisions obscure rather than enhance a performer's natural gifts. What's particularly fascinating about these overproduced failures is that they often contain glimpses of what could have been. Beneath the layers of orchestration and studio trickery, Elvis's voice, one of the most distinctive instruments in popular music, occasionally breaks through, reminding listeners of his unparalleled ability to convey emotion and energy. These moments make the production missteps all the more frustrating for fans and music historians alike. Let's journey through 8 tracks where excessive production choices undermined the king's natural talents, starting from the later period of his career and working our way back to earlier examples. Number 8. Way Down, 1977. Did Elvis's final single suffer from production choices that masked his declining vocal powers? Way Down, released just before Elvis's death in August 1977, represents a fascinating case study in late-period Elvis production techniques. Recorded at Graceland in the Jungle Room, during what would be Elvis's final recording sessions, Way Down features production choices clearly designed to compensate for Elvis's diminished vocal range and energy. The track employs heavy echo effects, prominent backing vocals, and electronic keyboard elements that were trendy for the era, but distracted from Elvis himself. The song features J.D. Sumner's ultra-low bass vocals, which drop to a remarkable low C, creating a gimmicky effect that draws attention away from Elvis. While the song became a posthumous hit, reaching number 1 in the UK after Elvis's death, the production feels like an attempt to distract from the reality of Elvis's declining health and vocal abilities. Engineers deliberately double-tracked Elvis's voice and added significant reverb to disguise the weakening of his once powerful instrument. The backing instrumentation is cluttered with late 70s production techniques that don't age particularly well. Amid all these distractions, the emotional core that made Elvis's best work so compelling gets lost. What makes the overproduction particularly tragic is that underneath all the studio manipulation, there are moments where Elvis's voice breaks through with genuine feeling. These glimpses suggest that a more stripped-down approach might have resulted in a more dignified final single, allowing Elvis's natural expressiveness to shine through despite his physical limitation. Way Down hit number 1 on the country charts and performed respectably on the pop charts, but it represents a moment where production choices were clearly made to mask deficiencies rather than highlight strengths. The song serves as a poignant reminder of how studio techniques were increasingly used to compensate as Elvis's legendary voice began to fail him in his final years. Number 7. Hurt, 1976. Can too many dramatic production effects ruin a potentially great vocal performance? Hurt, a cover of a song originally performed by Teeny Euro, shares Elvis's impressive vocal range, but suffers from production excess that undermines its emotional impact. Recorded in February 1976 in the Jungle Room at Graceland, Hurt features Elvis delivering some of the most powerful high notes of his later career. The song begins relatively simply, with Elvis's voice front and center, prodding his still impressive vocal abilities. However, as the song progresses, producer Felton Jarvis adds layers upon layers of orchestration, backing vocals and dramatic effects that create an overwhelming wall of sound. The production's most excessive moment comes during the song's finale, where Elvis's impressive sustained high note is nearly drowned out by crashing cymbals, soaring strings, and theatrical backing vocals. What should have been a showcase for Elvis's vocal prowess instead becomes a demonstration of 1970s production excess. The song's arrangement follows a predictable pattern seen in many late-period Elvis recordings. Start quietly, build to a massive climax, then repeat the process with even more intensity. While this formula created dramatic concert moments, on record it often feels formulaic and overwrought, as it does here. Interestingly, Hurt became a moderate hit for Elvis, despite its production issues, reaching number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100. Many fans and critics have noted that Elvis's vocal performance on this track is actually quite remarkable, making the excessive production all the more frustrating. Had the arrangement been more restrained, allowing Elvis's emotional delivery to take center stage, Hurt might be remembered as one of his finest later recordings, rather than an example of 1970s production excess. Elvis himself seemed to recognize the power of the song beneath its overproduction, as he performed it regularly in his final concerts, often to great effect. In those live versions, without the full orchestral backing, the raw emotion of his performance could shine through more effectively. Number 6. Suspicious Minds, Live from Las Vegas, 1970. Is it possible to ruin a classic song with unnecessary additions? The live version of Suspicious Minds from Elvis's Las Vegas performances demonstrates how even great material can be undermined by excessive arrangement choices. The studio version of Suspicious Minds, released in 1969, is widely regarded as one of Elvis's finest later career recordings. However, the live Las Vegas arrangement featured on the album On Stage takes a brilliant, tightly produced song and stretches it with unnecessary instrumental breaks, exaggerated tempo changes, and theatrical flourishes that dilute its emotional impact. Recorded during Elvis's Vegas residency at the International Hotel, this version extends the original song's running time by adding a prolonged breakdown section where the tempo slows dramatically before building back up. While this arrangement gave Elvis and his band an opportunity to create a show-stopping concert moment, on record it feels indulgent and disrupts the song's natural flow. The live version also features an expanded orchestration, with prominent horns and additional percussion that clutter the arrangement. Backrack singers are mixed much more prominently than in the studio version, sometimes competing with Elvis's lead vocal rather than supporting it. The overall effect is a version that prioritizes Vegas spectacle over the soulful essence that made the original recording so powerful. What makes this overproduced live version particularly frustrating is that it became the definitive concert arrangement of the song for the remainder of Elvis's career. Night after night, this bloated arrangement was performed with the same theatrical breakdown section, turning what was originally an emotionally direct song about a troubled relationship into a predictable showbiz set piece. Fans attending Elvis's concerts often cite Suspicious Minds as a highlight of his shows, suggesting that in person, the theatrical elements enhanced the experience. However, on record, without the visual spectacle of Elvis and his jump-suited stage presence, the arrangement's excesses become much more apparent, making this a classic example of Vegas-era overproduction. Number 5. In the Ghetto. Live, 1969. Can a socially conscious song lose its impact through overproduction? The live version of In the Ghetto from Elvis's Las Vegas performances demonstrates how excessive theatricality can undermine a song's serious message. Mac Davis's original composition In the Ghetto provided Elvis with a rare opportunity to address social issues, telling the story of a child born into poverty and the cycle of violence that ultimately claims his life. The studio version, produced by Chips Moman in Memphis, is relatively restrained, allowing the narrative and Elvis's sensitive vocal to carry the emotional weight of the song's message. However, when adapted for Elvis's Las Vegas shows in 1969 and 1970, In the Ghetto underwent a transformation that emphasized theatrical presentation over lyrical substance. The live arrangement added swelling strings, prominent backing vocalists, and dramatic pauses that turned a sobering social commentary into something resembling a Broadway showstopper. Elvis's Vegas band, including full horn section and orchestral strings, created a lush backdrop that sometimes overwhelmed the simple story at the heart of the song. The addition of exaggerated dynamic shifts, building from whisper quiet to thunderously loud, created dramatic moments that seemed designed more for audience reaction than for serving the song's narrative. What makes this overproduction particularly problematic is that it shifts the focus from the song's message about urban poverty and violence to Elvis's performance itself. The serious subject matter becomes secondary to the production spectacle, diluting the impact of what was one of Elvis's most lyrically significant recordings of the period. Despite these production issues, Elvis's vocal performance remains committed and emotional, suggesting he understood and respected the song's message, even as the arrangement worked against it. There are moments when his voice cuts through the excessive instrumentation, delivering lines with a sincerity that temporarily overcomes the overproduction. The live In the Ghetto exemplifies a broader challenge Elvis faced during his Vegas years, balancing authentic musical expression with the entertainment expectations of a casino showroom audience. Too often, as in this case, the Las Vegas production aesthetic prevailed, resulting in arrangements that prioritized spectacle over substance. Number 4. If I Can Dream. 1968. Did excessive patriotic production elements diminish what could have been Elvis's most powerful political statement? If I Can Dream, recorded for Elvis's 1968 television comeback special, represents both a powerful vocal performance and a case of production choices that sometimes undercut its message. Written by W. Earl Brown specifically for Elvis, in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy's assassinations, If I Can Dream gave Elvis a rare opportunity to make a statement about the turbulent political climate of 1968. Elvis delivered one of his most committed vocal performances, bringing genuine emotion and belief to the song's lyrics about hope for a better world. However, the production by Bones Howe includes elements that push the song toward sentimentality rather than letting its powerful message stand on its own. The arrangement builds from a relatively simple introduction to a massive orchestral and choral conclusion that borders on overblown patriotic spectacle. The addition of extensive string sections, timpani rolls, and a large choir creates a production that sometimes feels more appropriate for a 4th of July celebration than a serious plea for social change. The most heavy-handed production choice comes in the song's final section, where the backing choir swells to dominate the mix with American anthem-style harmonies that feel designed to provoke an emotional response through production rather than through the song's actual message. These elements reflect the television special context for which the song was created, but on record, they can feel manipulative and dated. What makes the production choices particularly frustrating is that Elvis's vocal performance is genuinely spectacular. He builds from restrained verses to a passionate conclusion, pushing his voice to its limits with genuine conviction. In the moments where the production pulls back slightly and allows Elvis's voice to take center stage, the song achieves a power that the most overproduced sections never quite match. Despite these production issues, If I Can Dream remains an important recording in Elvis's catalog, demonstrating his willingness to engage with the social issues of his time when given the opportunity. That it succeeds at all, despite its occasionally heavy-handed production, is a testament to the strength of Elvis's performance and the resonance of the song's message in the turbulent year of 1968. Number 3. U.S. Mail, 1968. How did Elvis end up recording a country novelty song buried under gimmicky production effects? U.S. Mail, written by Jerry Reed, represents a curious moment in Elvis's catalog where a potentially fun country track is overwhelmed by production choices that emphasize novelty over musicality. Recorded in January 1968, with guitarist Jerry Reed playing on the session, U.S. Mail features production by Felton Jarvis that leans heavily into the song's play on words, U.S. Mail Mail, with sound effects including mail whistles and an exaggerated echo on Elvis's voice that emphasizes the song's comedic intentions rather than its musical merits. The track's arrangement includes a busy mixture of electric guitars, bass, drums, and piano that creates a cluttered soundscape, with Elvis's voice often competing with Reed's distinctive guitar playing. Additional percussion elements and background vocals further complicate the production, resulting in a busy mix that distracts from what could have been a straightforward country performance. Most problematic is the affected vocal style. Elvis adopts clearly influenced by Reed's own delivery, but pushed into caricature territory by the production's emphasis on the song's novelty aspects. The heavy echo effect applied to Elvis's voice during certain sections, particularly when delivering the title phrase, U.S. Mail, transforms what might have been a playful vocal choice into something that sounds gimmicky and dated. The song reached a respectable pound 28 on the Billboard Hot 100, suggesting that despite its production issues, it connected with some listeners. However, compared to the authentic country recordings Elvis had made earlier in his career, U.S. Mail feels artificial and contrived, an example of Elvis and his production team trying too hard to create a specific effect, rather than allowing a natural performance to emerge. What makes this overproduction particularly disappointing is that during this same period, Elvis was capable of much more authentic work. The song's release came just months before his legendary 1968 comeback special, which would showcase a more genuine and passionate Elvis. U.S. Mail, with its gimmicky production and affected performance style, represents the type of material Elvis needed to move beyond to reclaim his artistic credibility. Number 2. Old Macdonald, 1967. Can even Elvis make a children's nursery rhyme work as a pop record? Old Macdonald, recorded for the soundtrack of the film Double Trouble, demonstrates what happens when even Elvis can't overcome a fundamentally misconceived production concept. This bizarre track takes the familiar children's song and attempts to transform it into a rock and roll number through a series of questionable production choices. The arrangement begins with a standard rock and roll band setup, but quickly incorporates farm animal sound effects, exaggerated vocal deliveries, and a forced attempt at creating a party atmosphere in the studio. The production by Felden Jarvis seems caught between creating a legitimate rock and roll track and acknowledging the inherent silliness of the material. This indecision results in a recording that succeeds at neither objective, instead creating an uncomfortable listening experience where Elvis sounds uncharacteristically uncommitted and even embarrassed by the material. Most problematic is the addition of artificial laughter and party noises intended to create the impression of a spontaneous good time in the studio. These elements feel painfully forced and only highlight the fundamental problem with the track. No one, including Elvis himself, seems genuinely enthusiastic about recording a rock and roll version of Old Macdonald. The instrumental backing features competent playing from Elvis's regular session musicians, but their efforts are undermined by the production's insistence on interrupting the music with farmyard sound effects and the aforementioned fake party atmosphere. Even the guitar solos, which might have provided some legitimate musical interest, are undercut by the overall novelty approach to the material. This recording came during a particularly difficult period in Elvis's career, when his film commitments often required him to record material far below his artistic capabilities. Old Macdonald represents perhaps the nadir of this trend, a track where excessive production gimmicks fail to disguise the fundamental unsuitability of the material for Elvis's talents. What makes this overproduction especially frustrating is the glimpse it provides of how Elvis's career was being mismanaged during this period. Just a year later, the 1968 comeback special would prove that Elvis remained a formidable musical talent when given appropriate material and production. Old Macdonald stands as a stark reminder of how far his recorded output had strayed from his authentic artistic voice. Number 1. A Dog's Life, 1967. How did one of the greatest voices in popular music end up barking on record? A Dog's Life, recorded for the soundtrack of the film Easy Come, Easy Go, represents perhaps the most egregious example of production choices that not only fail to enhance Elvis's performance, but actively undermine his dignity as an artist. This track, written by Ben Wiesman and Sid Wayne, requires Elvis to not only sing from the perspective of a dog, but actually imitate canine barking and whining throughout the recording. The production by Joseph Lilly embraces these novelty elements with enthusiasm that borders on the sadistic, given Elvis's evident discomfort with the material. The arrangement features an undistinguished mid-1960s pop backdrop, with light orchestration and a rhythm section going through the motions without conviction. However, the most problematic production element is the emphasis placed on Elvis's dog imitations, which are highlighted in the mix and even enhanced with echo effects to ensure listeners don't miss the spectacle of rock and roll's king reduced to barking on command. Backrank vocals repeat the phrase, "It's a dog's life," with forced cheerfulness that contrasts painfully with the audible discomfort in Elvis's delivery. The production seems determined to present the track as light-hearted fun, but the result feels more like witnessing a talented artist being humiliated through production choices that prioritize novelty over music. This recording came during the lowest artistic period of Elvis's film career, when his movies had devolved into formulaic vehicles requiring increasingly absurd musical numbers. A Dog's Life represents the logical endpoint of this trend, a moment where production decisions seemed actively hostile to Elvis's talents and dignity as a performer. What makes the overproduction of this track particularly tragic is that it coincided with a period when rock music was evolving rapidly through groundbreaking albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Pet Sounds. While Elvis's contemporaries were pushing the boundaries of studio production, he found himself reduced to barking on a soundtrack recording where production choices seemed designed to emphasize the very worst aspects of the material. A Dog's Life remains a painful reminder of how far Elvis's recorded output had strayed from his authentic voice by the mid-1960s, and how production decisions could compound rather than mitigate the problems with substandard material. That Elvis would reclaim his artistic standing just a year later with the 1968 comeback special makes tracks like this all the more frustrating for fans and music historians. Have you ever wondered what these songs might have sounded like with production that enhanced rather than detracted from Elvis's natural talents?